All right, welcome everyone. We are thrilled to have you with us today. My name is Paula Birnbaum. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Art and Architecture, and I direct the Museum Studies Master's Program. And we're very honored to be presenting, sponsored by Thatcher Gallery and the Art History and Arts Management Program, a program with Deborah and Andy Rappaport and Catharine Clark, discussing the emerging changes in the San Francisco Bay Area art scene. So today we wanted to structure our event to be more of a conversation. And I just want to begin by saying we're very grateful to have the three of you here to celebrate the student-curated exhibit, The Depravities of War, Sandow Burke and the Art of Social Critique, which is on display at Thatcher Gallery through February 19th. And we have our student curators here. Would you stand up so we can recognize you? Wonderful. And they worked with my colleague here, Catherine on curating the exhibition. So our agenda is to learn from your respective experiences about how to establish new models of collecting, and really cultivating a new dialogue in the art scene in the Bay Area with the goal of supporting social justice initiatives. And as an urban Jesuit institution, we're particularly excited about promoting a dialogue on how the arts can affect social change, which the Depravities of War certainly has been doing here on campus. So I'd like to start by introducing our speakers. Deborah and Andy Rappaport are philanthropists, arts leaders, and co-founders of San Francisco's path-breaking Minnesota Street Project, 3 converted warehouses offering below-market rate gallery spaces, artists' live-work studios.
No. I have to say that in case anybody from the planning department. No live.
Excuse me, delete that word. And shipping services. It's also home to the San Francisco Arts Education Project, which is the largest provider of arts education to San Francisco public schools. In less than a year, Minnesota Street Projects has already become a thriving arts destination and community resource, a real lifeline for San Francisco artists, galleries, and nonprofits threatened with unsustainable rents. In 2002, Deborah and Andy established the Rappaport Family Foundation, and a year later they launched Skyline Public Works, a political venture capital firm which has donated more than $6 million to civic engagement and arts organizations in recent years. For the past 3 decades, Deborah and Andy have initiated and participated in efforts that increase civic participation and arts education among young people and other traditionally underserved populations. Deborah has a long history as a political and social justice activist and is president of the Rappaport Family Foundation. She currently serves on the boards of People for the American Way, the Berkeley Art Museum, the Headland Center for the Arts, and Creative Capital in New York. She's also a recipient of this year's Art Table Chapter Leadership Award. So congratulations. Andy has deep roots in Silicon Valley and has spent more than 30 years founding, investing in, and guiding scores of transformative startup companies. From 1996 until his retirement in 2012, Andy was a partner at August Capital, a leading technology venture capital firm, which he helped grow from $100 million to more than $2 billion under his management. Andy is a noted authority on the business and economic implications of changing technologies and has written and spoken extensively on the topic. He has served on the boards of more than 40 public and private companies and is founder of the New Progressive Coalition. Finally, I will add that both Deborah and Andy are artists themselves. Deborah is a jewelry designer, and Andy an accomplished guitarist, songwriter, and photographer. Next, I'd like to welcome Catharine Clark, a San Francisco native and longtime innovator in the San Francisco art scene. She founded Catharine Clark Gallery in 1991 in the Hayes Street district. And was one of the first local art dealers to support the work of emerging artists in the Bay Area, working in a wide variety of media.
I might be overstated, but.
The gallery has since moved 3 times, most recently in 2014 to the emerging Do-Re-Mi Arts District, comprised of adjoining neighborhoods in Dogpatch, Potrero Hill, and the Mission. The gallery also runs a smaller satellite space in New York in the Chelsea neighborhood. The gallery's program has garnered critical attention from numerous publications in the Times, Art Forum, Flash Art, and so on, and works by many of the artists are represented in prominent museums and international exhibitions. The gallery has pioneered the presentation of new media art in San Francisco and is the first commercial gallery in the area with a dedicated media room. An accomplished curator and author, in 2006, Catharine authored an essay and edited the monograph Ascending Chaos, The Art of Masmi Perioko, published with Chronicle Books. She's taught professional practice courses at the San Francisco Art Institute and has regularly been a guest lecturer here at USF. And her gallery is one of the most popular sites for interns among our students. A member of the San Francisco Art Dealers Association since 1994 and Yerba Buena Alliance since '97, Catharine serves on the boards of 01, the Art and Technology Network, and her gallery is one of the very first to dedicate a separate space for media. She's an advisory board member to San Francisco Recycling and Disposal Inc.'s Artist in Residency program, along with the San Francisco Arts Education Project. And let's give a big round of welcome to all 3. So to start off, we'd like to talk about your collecting interests and questions related to kind of what makes your interest unique. So given your mutual commitment to standout work, whose stunning series we have here in the gallery, we've noticed that you're all invested in themes of social justice and socially engaged work that really challenge the status quo politically, which is so important at this time. So I wonder if you can address this and kind of tracing back to your history of collecting. Has this kind of socially engaged theme been a prominent theme in your collecting interests all along?
You want to start or should I start?
Why don't you go ahead, because you know I'm going to interrupt you.
I know. So the first thing, actually, on that score, the first thing I should say is that in listening to the introduction, I don't know how Katie felt, but I know how Deborah and I feel when we hear that introduction. It makes us sound like, whatever we've accomplished in our lives, we've accomplished on purpose. What I can tell you, and this is true of our collecting too, is it only makes sense in retrospect. That if you had put if anybody had put themselves in our shoes in 1979 when Deborah and I started dating, Deborah was still an undergraduate, and said any of those things were going to happen, let alone that we'd be collecting art or we'd be here talking about it, we'd have said, you're nuts, it cannot possibly happen. But it's just been a series of accidents that have allowed us to discover ourselves along the way, and that's the story of our collecting. We started out, and Deborah can elaborate a little bit, but we started out collecting art because art, looking at art was free, and we had no money, and we had spare time, and it was something we enjoyed to do together. And sorry, Katie, but we could go to galleries, and if we behaved ourselves and dressed reasonably well, we could spend a lot of time in them looking at art and asking questions and having our questions answered, and it didn't cost anything.
Before we met you, we weren't spending money.
It cost nothing. We could go from gallery to gallery in Boston and learn a lot and have a fun day and go to a museum and talk about art, and it would enrich us and it wouldn't impoverish us. And so it was just something that we enjoyed doing together, and as we started having the ability to acquire things, which we never thought we would, we started acquiring things that we found interesting. And at the time we started, I don't think there was any rubric other than it was cheap.
And we agreed on it.
And we agreed on it, exactly. But then over time, what happened was we started accumulating a lot of art, and we started thinking about, well, we have more art than we know what to do with at some point, or we have to decide what are we actually going to put in our home. And we started finding that we were attracted to certain things and other things were less attractive, and we didn't even think about that very much until all of a sudden we said, wait, the last 10 pieces we bought all said something political, right? And we were, why is this? We said, well, because this is the work that speaks to us. When we think about what art should be about, our feeling is it should be about saying something interesting interesting, or about the process of an artist coming to terms with what he or she wants to say, or making you a little bit uncomfortable, or making you think a little bit about things you otherwise wouldn't have thought about, or maybe even making other people think about things they weren't thinking about.
Or occasionally making people look at our art, turn around and look at it.
Which very often happens.
Well, no, not often, but it has happened.
Regularly happens. And so what we found is that was what was really speaking to us. That it not only the individual works spoke to us, but the artists spoke to us like Sandow as we got to know him and his work. And the experience of exposing other people to that work spoke to us. And frankly, the idea of supporting artists who were making that kind of work spoke to us. And so that's how our collection, over probably the last 10 or a dozen years, has taken social commentary on as a main
And
focus.
it's the reason that we bought all of the Depravity wood prints, the source material, so that they could travel together, because that's how they tell that social commentary story.
Yeah, there's sort of an interesting story around that.
Yeah, there is.
We were telling, because I think it speaks to, one, your incredible sort of eye for work that is meaningful and powerful, but also for this issue that I think you guys are interested in, which is this sort of new model. And I don't know how new this model is, but it is
I
a
think
model.
it goes back to the Medici's, actually.
But this idea of patronage extending beyond just acquisition. So one of the many, many things that's great about the Rappaports is that part of their sort of philanthropic thinking has allowed them to think broader than just acquisition and what's going to be in their home, but also how this work can have a wider purview. And obviously they've seen that with this exhibition, they lent it. But if we back up from there, how do we get from the artist making the work to the show here at the gallery? This is quite a while ago now, so I may have some of the details a little wrong, but basically at the time, Sandow was working in Hawaii at the Kui Press with Paul Milani. I think many of you probably heard both of them speaking. And this project was incredibly difficult to pull off. I'm sure they spoke to the technical challenges of working on a 4 by 8 foot piece of plywood, double-sided plywood. This is not even like an etching that had any kind of mechanical process where it could go through a press. It had to be hand rubbed. Multiple people had to work on it at once. And as a result, the edition was quite small. A numbered edition of 2, I believe, and 2 APs. And it was really important for us to try to keep at least 1 or 2 sets of the Preludes of War together, because of what Deborah said, this story that needed to be told and needed to be shared. And that while each of them, I think, stands on their own, I think collectively they're better than each of the individual pieces. And so the Rappaports generously offered, because we had institutional interest in exhibiting these works, but obviously getting them from Hawaii to, I think the first show might have been in Chicago, was a big challenge. And there were challenges on a lot of different fronts, like how were they going to get shipped? Once they got there, how were they going to be hung, because they were unframed, et cetera. And they're large. And they're sort of fragile. They're on paper. It's a strong paper, a Gombe paper, but nonetheless. And so we constructed this really interesting model in which the Rappaports gifted money to the Hui. It was a nonprofit at the time, which enabled them to be able to travel the exhibition with the gallery's help. And additionally, they agreed to acquire and house the woodblock prints when the edition was fully printed, the woodblocks themselves, once the edition was fully executed. So what you have in the gallery, that beautiful board that's below the slideshow, that's one of the actual panels that I'm sure the student curators know that the print was drawn from, and I don't know what the right word is, created from, printed from. And anyhow, so I mean, that's the kind of thing that...
Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, part of that, and we were thrilled to be able to do this, and we've done other similar sorts of, I've been shocked at the fact that we've sort of come up with some of the ideas for helping to support artists and to get work in front of the right people, but nevertheless, it comes from a lot of the same place as the Minnesota Street Project comes from. which is we don't actually know what the rules are, so we don't have to follow them.
And the other part of that is that if we did know what they were, we wouldn't care about them. But that's
Right, that's a whole other, that's a different
But a
conversation.
little bit of the story behind the story of the prints that are here and our acquisition of them in the current, because I think it's, when we talk about these new models and everything, you'll hear me say this over and over. It's not like we hatch these things and then, and then they appear to us like the tablets down. But man, here's what happened. So Deborah and I had, we're realizing that it really meant a lot to us to explore in our own collection how art can make social commentary, and we hope encourage social change. But we didn't really have a very clear idea about what to do with that. And two things happened at the same time. One, we were very politically active in efforts to try to improve the political situation that unfortunately led to the Iraq War and other horrible things since. And we were very deeply involved in a bunch of political efforts, some of which felt like they might be successful, some of which were a little frustrating. And in the back of our minds was, what role does an artist play in this? What role can art play? We don't really know. We don't have an idea of what to do. It's just interesting because the art and the artists are speaking to us. And then the phone rang one day, and I remember it very vividly. I happened to be home on a rainy afternoon like today, and it was Katie, whom we didn't know super well at that time. We bought some work for her. I think
This might have been the beginning of our very close
yeah.
friendship.
and Katie, I think your gallery was still on Erie Street, and
I think I just moved to
Okay, so
it was like 2007.
yeah, but early on in us getting to know each other, and Katie said, I hope you don't think I'm presumptuous. and I had you can feel free to say no, and I hadn't even said hello yet, and you can feel free to say no. And then she told me, the story of the prints and the desire to have them travel and the practical difficulties of having them travel. And there was so much apology that I was trying to say, yes, whatever, okay, great, that's terrific. I couldn't get a word in. And finally, Katie got to the punchline, which is if we were to acquire the works and she proposed a means to do that, then they would be able to travel. And I hope you don't mind my asking. It's like, what? Mind your thank you, because we've been searching for ways to explore how we can support the efforts of artists to express themselves. We hope in a way that can foment some change or at least reflection. And what better time and what better works to do that with? So this is not some great idea we had about how to fulfill our desire to showcase socially relevant work, but this was just us putting ourselves in a position where somebody could come to us with a terrific idea, and all we had to say was yes. So,
And we have continued to say yes to other things,
yeah, and that's
similar things.
And that's the disclaimer that we always offer in all this. Well, how'd you come up with that idea? Well, we listened to people. We answered the phone. We listened to people when they talked.
But it really is the same impetus behind the Soda Street project. We answered. Actually, we're sitting in Katie's office when we had the idea. She's the godmother, wife, or something for the Soda Street project.
I mean, I think that it's important to say that the gallery my gallery moved from Ministry near us at MoMA to 2013 and was among the first of the galleries that was displaced by changing economics. As some of you may recall, there was a huge recession. And that already had, put many galleries in challenging financial situations as well as artists. And then there was it seemed to some of us a quick recovery in terms of going from really struggling to frankly stay open to suddenly an economy in San Francisco that became untenable for creative people and creative venues and of all sorts, irrespective of IRS categorization. And so Brian Gross, who's my neighbor in my space on Utah Street, and I were lucky in that we found an industrial building that I think similar to Minnesota Street Project did not have, they weren't allowed to rent to a startup company because the way that they were designated was for light industrial and gallery use fell into that use rather than into office use. And as a result, we were able to secure a lease there. But there were all these other galleries and nonprofits and artists and so forth in the community that were struggling. And the art world here was incredibly depressed. I mean, people were really, really freaked out, myself among them. And so this was a regular topic of conversation. And Andy and Deborah kindly said, well, what do we do? And then there was this meeting that took place in the gallery, and many, many people came, and everybody listened, or you guys listened to what they said,
tell us, don't us.
And then it went from there.
And here we are now.
Thankfully.
But again, it goes back to we didn't know, we barely knew that there were rules, let alone what they were. And coming from the backgrounds that we come from, Andy, from business, I come from more of a nonprofit side, but some business also. Just being able to look at the problem with different eyes, with new eyes, not having been sort of living in the soup and indoctrinated in the way things had been done, or the things that people say, well, we tried that and it didn't work, so we're never going to try it again. And that's not just about art, that happens in pretty much everything we've ever done. We could just say, okay, here's a problem, here's what the solution could look like, let's see if it works. Which is, the same with supporting Sandow's career, and pretty much everything else we do. And again, it really only makes sense looking backwards.
I think the organic nature of it is really important to stress, especially for young people here, because, I wasn't much older than probably any of you guys when I started my own space, but I didn't know I was starting a gallery. And I'm serious. I started paying rent on a space and doing projects, and I think, to your guys' point, that if you have an idea about something that you care about passionately, and you use that as sort of a guide for the kinds of choices and paths that you take, it doesn't always work out, but I think about all the things that I did for years and years to make my gallery work, because I wanted to be able to show the kind of work that I do. It never was about a business plan or, choosing artists that by some measure would be saleable, whatever that means. It was sort of okay, I've been working with Sandow for 25 years. So the idea was okay, there's work out there by artists who are my peers, who are exploring ideas that I think are really important to support. How can I do that? And it's worked out, but it's mainly worked out because I haven't thought too much about how it would work out.
Worst people to be talking to a room of college students right now.
Not a business person.
To give Katie a little bit of credit. So, and I've learned this through my business career. There are a couple different ways you can approach something. You can say, this is something I'm going to do. In one way or other, I'm going to try to make this successful. And if you pick the right thing to do, and you pick something that if it is successful, it might matter, and you figure out how to do it, then that might work out really well. But the problem with that is that you might pick the wrong thing to do, or you might pick something that's impossible to do, or whatever. Another way to think about things is to say, there's something that I would like to have accomplished, right? And what I've discovered is the people who latch on to, this is the thing I would like to have accomplished, tend to be a lot more successful. And the reason is because it's much easier to keep that inside. And so if your objective, as with Katie is, I am really committed to creating an opportunity for artists that have something to say, right? And then there are a lot of different artists with a lot of different things to say. There are a lot of different means of expression, both for the artist and opportunities for getting their work out, like what you've done for Sandow or with Sandow and Paul with this series of prints. And I think if you root yourself in, this is my high-level objective, and I'm going to figure out things to do in support of that objective, and some of them are going to work, and some of them aren't going to work, and I'll just do more of the ones that work. Then there's a way higher likelihood of being successful, and you can actually stack the deck in your favor by thinking that way. And we did that again, coming back to our we did that with the Minnesota Street Project. We thought about the challenges the city was facing. Our motivation was rooted in one very simple idea, which is a society without artists isn't much of a society. So a city without artists, therefore, is not much of a city, and certainly not one in which we want to live. And then we said, well, for artists to survive, a whole lot of things have to happen because artists live in an ecosystem, and the elements of that ecosystem are kind of naturally mutually supporting. And if they don't all exist, at least at some critical level, then none of them will exist at any level. And so we need to do something which is multifaceted, otherwise it will.
However, when we started, which was just about almost exactly 3 years ago, we knew none of that. We knew that there was a problem that we could define reasonably well. And we knew that there had to be a solution someplace, but we didn't know that it would involve all of the components that the Soda Street project involves, or any of the specifics of what's happening.
That's precisely the point I was headed towards, which is that we said a lot of stuff will have to happen in order to achieve the objective that we set out for ourselves, but we don't know which specific things. And we don't know which are important, we don't know which will work, we just know it's a lot of stuff. And so we said, if we have a big enough box of spaghetti we can throw at the wall, some of it's going to stick. And we just need to make sure that we're listening, and we need to give the spaghetti to other people to throw at the wall, because they'll be better at it than we are. And so exactly, and so we've been really surprised by a lot of the things that have emanated out of the original idea. But again, the way we do things is first, we figured if we fail, so what? As Deborah said, at least we tried. But we stack the deck in our favor a little bit sometimes just by saying, how we do it is less important to us, and what we do is less important. But the objective we have, if we're true to that, and we're listening very carefully with other people, and we're watching very carefully what works and doesn't, then maybe we have a shot at achieving.
And all of this ends up under the umbrella of mission-driven companies, which I'm starting to really dislike, because I think every company should have a mission. But we are just to, about Minnesota Street Project, we are not nonprofit, right? We are a for-profit company doing philanthropic work.
And supporting nonprofits.
That's
space,
one of the reasons that we are for-profit is so that we can simultaneously rent to nonprofits and to just standalone businesses and have a restaurant and have everything else that we've got without having to stick within the IRS lines.
So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that you've faced with this
Biggest
project?
challenges we faced? I don't know. Well, one of the challenges at the beginning, and before we had space, before we actually knew what it was going to be, we knew it was going to be in the southeastern part of the city for some zoning reasons. So that meant it was going to be Potrero Hill, but not much of Potrero Hill, Dogpatch or Bayview. So the neighborhoods that 3 years ago, nobody ever thought, unless they were going to have dinner at Pacino, or they went to the open studios at the Shipyard, nobody even knew where these places were, let alone when they were. So part of what I was doing when we were starting to play the idea was going around and trying to recruit galleries who wanted to come rent with us. And I heard over and over again, I can't do that because my clients won't come. Or I need to stay where I am because it's near the museum. Or the hotels are all here. I can't move down to the back of Beyond down there, where all anybody knows is that's where the Hells Angels headquarters are. They're our neighbors. So that was a huge, that was a hurdle I didn't expect at the beginning. But that obviously we have surmounted.
But it's part of a whole collection of things that I think represent the biggest challenge, which is, one thing about doing something different is that it's different. And sometimes to solve a problem, you have to do something different. And when I was a venture capitalist, I began to realize that the best ideas are the ones that look stupidest when you first hear it. And you have to be careful because it doesn't mean just because something sounds stupid when you first hear it, it's a great idea. But you have to be careful. If it doesn't sound kind of stupid when you first hear it, it probably isn't a world-changing idea. And you think about that and you realize it's kind of for obvious reasons. So the problem that everyone has when they do something that's kind of different is they have to convince people it's not really stupid. And we had to do that on a lot of different dimensions. One that Deborah just cited is that, Dogpatch was like part of another city at the time we started. And in fact, conventional wisdom said we should just go to Oakland because it's cheaper. Turns out, had we done that, it wouldn't have been cheaper and it would have been much harder and less to do and ultimately less successful. But Oakland felt closer to San Francisco than Dogpatch did, which is part of San Francisco figure. But there were other things that we had to do too. Like, we built an art gallery building that is basically a commune for 10 commercial galleries. And if anybody who's ever known anyone or lived on a commune or anything like that, it takes a certain kind of person. It takes a certain kind of person to live in an environment where the survival of any individual person is largely dependent on the survival of everyone else. And that is for in our studios, our galleries building, it's for very sound and strong economic reasons. We couldn't have provided the kind of space at the kind of cost that we're charging for it had we not created a lot of shared resources which require people to literally have a schedule for who's going to do the dishes on what days.
Does that work? Are there
And
arguments?
so, strangely enough, when we started this and we proposed this idea, one of the most common areas of pushback was our galleries pride themselves on their independence and
their
privacy and not sharing their clients when they walk in, and you're going to have a hard time with this.
So I do have to interject here that we have a self-selected group.
We do.
But we have people galleries and gallery owners and gallery employees who think that this is not the end of civilization as we know it.
They had to in order to sign up,
Exactly.
and some of them did it. And again, to be completely honest about this, some of them did it because it was like the next thing over from the end of civilization as we know it. If we just keep doing what we're doing, okay, that's the end. We're out. Okay, this is not quite that bad, right? Yeah, we can consider some of these things. And what's happened, and it's been really interesting. It's happened to a greater degree than we ever imagined, and it's happened way, way faster, is we now have the folks in our gallery building, saying this is the most unbelievable work environment we've ever been in. The degree of collaboration, the sense of community.
And yes, they all do dishes.
And they all do, and it's so gratifying for Deborah and me, in part because that's what we wanted to create, but in part, it's also a little vindicating, because that was one of the big challenges, is could that ever work?
And quite frankly, all of us up here could each have a different list of 10 galleries among whom this model would not have worked. So I don't want you guys to go away thinking that the model that we ended up with is the only one that will lead to the survival of art galleries. It is a model that has never been done before, and that has led to the survival, and I would also go so far as to say success, of the galleries who have chosen to follow this model.
I think there's something really important that they said, which is that these guys gave the city and people who care about the arts in the city an opportunity to feel hopeful again. And not that that model would fit for everybody, like you said, but just symbolically it was hugely important. It continues to be hugely important. And it's this idea that community matters, and it really doesn't even matter who the individual players are. It is like a commune that way. I think it has had an incredible impact on how we as gallerists feel about the survival of our businesses in San Francisco, even if we're not in the Soda Street project.
Well, I do have to say, if I might, that before we opened, but when we were still talking about it, I started hearing myself say over and over again to people, I think what's happening is that people have figured out that the light at the end of the tunnel is not a train coming out. There actually is light out there.
So funny thing about that. We focus a lot, Deborah and I, on what can we do in support of the objectives that we have. And one of the things that characterizes which sometimes puts us in unusual or unique circumstances, is that, you know, we thrive on risk. We're willing to do the stuff that looks, you know, too crazy for normal people to do. But we, you know, but what we like to do and pride ourselves on sometimes is our ability to follow through and actually get stuff done. So we kind of focus on, okay, if we're going to make a commitment, we want to deliver on that commitment. So when we started, it was almost 3 years ago. The psychology of the city was exactly 3 years ago.
I mean, seriously, I think to the week.
The psychology is true. The psychology was, you know, this city is simply hostile to anything that's not related to tech companies. And, you know, that we can't afford to live here. The city doesn't want us. It's only going to get worse. And so, you know, the project emanated from conversations we had and heard about, you know, people who were either going to, you know, just felt they had to leave the city right now because they couldn't afford to be here, or they didn't want to recommit to being in the city because they had, you know, trying to figure out where they were going to, you know, their kids were going to grow up, and yeah, maybe I can eke it out here for another year or two, but, you know, I don't want to uproot my family then, and, you know, this is just too hard. We're going to go to LA or Seattle or even New York, or
And in some cases, just stop doing
or stop doing what we're doing. And so it was the urgency of the situation, the fact that we felt, boy, if the city loses its arts community, it's not going to ever get, or it'll be generations before they come back. The city will be forever changed. This isn't a good thing, whatever. So it's okay, we got to do something, and it's got to be big enough to make a difference.
And fast enough to say.
Fast enough, exactly. Let's try. Heads down, let's just figure something out. So we're busily trying to get this done. And we're trying to open our buildings, and it's not easy, and there's a million things that, you know, that we're dealing with every day. And we start to hear people call us, thank you for what you've done. And, you know, this happened enough times. We said, what we've done? Wait, we haven't done anything yet. Oh, we dug a big hole under a building, and hopefully.
Oh, you had that spreadsheet, honey.
Yeah.
That was working.
There was but you know, we tore a bunch of stuff up, and we made a lot of promises, but we haven't really done anything. And the lesson that I learned from this, and we both learned from this, is that sometimes what you do is a lot less important than the way you change the conversation. And what we realized was that, you know, we were very focused on, if we didn't open our doors in time, everybody was going to leave. And what we realized was that, and it's not just us, there were other things that were happening around the same time. The opening of the new SF MoMA and Berkeley Art Museum and 500 Cap Street and galleries like Katie's and stuff like that. But there was enough stuff happening that it changed the conversation from, this is impossible, to, maybe it's not impossible. And that was enough for people to go from being hopelessly, and I'm not exaggerating a lot, pessimistic, to at least cautiously optimistic. And that, I think, had more impact, just the contributing to the changing conversation, than any specific thing, any building or program or anything like that. So, of course, you know, then Deborah and I had the realization after we realized that before we opened, we said, oh, great. Now when we open, we could only screw it up.
Exactly, it only goes downhill from here.
Which fortunately,
it has not happened.
So in order to sustain this model, we really need to look to more people to contribute and to collect and to build what's going on here. So I'm wondering, Katie, if you could address this. How do you approach young people that are starting to collect? How do you foster their interest in supporting the community?
But I think it's, you know, a problem that most organizations, arts organizations face. Like, who is this next generation, and how do we get them excited about supporting the arts? And I don't know that I have the answer, but some of the things that I have done that I have noticed have brought in an expanded audience, and some of those people are younger. Is that, I mean, this is something that we've always done, but we've even done it more in the last several years. Is that we've collaborated a lot with nonprofits. Actually, San Francisco Arts Education Project, which is the nonprofit at Minnesota Street Project, they were one of the organizations that we started working with quite a bit on Utah Street. And I'm a product of the era in San Francisco and of the sort of early days of SF Arts Ed. So I had a particular affinity for that, and my own children have gone through their summer program, and my daughter through their musical theater program. And through that, you meet people who, sometimes you meet people who share your values. So And that's not just happening with SF Arts Ed, but also with many different types of nonprofits. We've also expanded our programming to include areas of the arts that you might not think about taking place in the galleries. So this past fall, we collaborated with, I think, 12 different nonprofits, 10 different nonprofits, on a project called Box Blur, in which we looked at what happens when dance is brought outside of the museum. And there, we worked with the San Francisco Dance Film Festival, with 500 CAP, with many different organizations. And it was in response to a very specific exhibition at the gallery where the artist was looking at dance marathons from the 20s and 30s and looking at issues of race relative to that. And so the people who want to collaborate with us tend to, have, again, similar values. So that's been one way, and that's included things like, bringing in the Fine Arts Museum's Art Point group, like giving them the space for the evening and talking to them. In fact, I think they came in during Sandow Burke's exhibition of Imaginary Monuments and talking to them specifically about the work. And I remember this one couple came up to me and they said, well, what are we going to do? This work is dealing with issues of, race and social injustice, and we have young children, and we really love this work, but we don't want to put it in front of them. And I was like, this is the perfect thing to put in front of young kids. This is a teaching opportunity.
You should just refer them to our kids.
Well, it helps to have your own, right?
Yeah.
Because people, I have had that response from adults, like, oh, I'm putting my hands over my children's eyes and seeing this, and I think to myself, well, actually, art has this incredible, art provides this incredible tool to be able to teach kids of all ages about all kinds of things, and so to not be afraid of it. So I've met a number of young people through those channels, but it's a work in progress. I think because San Francisco is such an expensive city, it takes a long time for people to be able to afford a place to live. A lot of people don't think about collecting art or supporting the arts, I think, until they own their own home, whether that's an apartment or a house or a condo or whatever. Still, it's difficult, I think, until people feel really rooted to think about moving to that next sort of. And I think there are other kinds of psychological barriers, like, oh, I'm not somebody who sees myself as somebody who collects. And that's something I'm really interested in trying to change, and I know these guys are too. How do you make your space feel approachable? How do you bring in an audience that's not intimidated? How do you let people know you have things that are, less expensive than the shoes you're wearing? That really collecting artwork is about a value. It's about a value shift in your brain, like maybe owning this, $200 print by Tony DiCenza, say, is more important than buying a new jacket or whatever. And so, it's not like, I think nobody wants to sort of be told that buying art is good for you. It's a kind of a broccoli problem. But but if you can get people in and have them have a positive experience and recognize that there are things that they can bring home that they can continue to enjoy, or there are, ways. I mean, right now, there are also 2 of Sandow Burke's pieces up at SF MoMA. And so, there are ways to like, you could have met Sandow if you came to the gallery in December. By the way, I show other artists than Sandow, but somehow he's doing there. And, you could have met him and you could have experienced the show, and you could go to the museum now and see it and feel a connection that way. And I think that's part of it, right? It's like making people feel like they are part of a community.
Right.
And I do feel like Minnesota Street Project fosters that, absolutely. That the space becomes a meeting point for so many things, but it's also a refuge. I mean, I think it's fair to say most of us are really freaked out about our president and what's been going on. And, galleries are a great place to find community that shares, or at least wants to have a conversation about those things. And a lot of people aren't religious, don't have a church, mosque, synagogue, whatever to go to where they feel connected, but they can come to a museum or a gallery or a huge collection of galleries, and
And it's free. I mean,
It's
free.
free, and people want to talk to you. I mean, they were joking earlier when they said, you know, that I would be upset if they came in before, you know, they were collecting. But truth is, I'm just excited if anybody walks through. And you know, we have somebody in the audience here who has worked for me, and you know, it is shocking how few people actually show up. I mean, it is like incredibly depressing. And I think there are many, many reasons for that. But
That's one of, if I can, that's one of the issues, it's one of the main issues that we were trying to address in the conceptualization of the space. I don't know how many of you have been to the project, but the entrance is this huge garage door. So it is just, today it might be closed, you might have to go through the real door. But usually it's just open. And a lot of that stems from some realizations I had when I was the president of the board at a museum not here in San Francisco, where I realized that nobody's born knowing how to go to either a museum or a gallery or any other, a ballet, a play, any art experience. That's something you need to learn. And the only way to learn it is if there is somebody who's willing to say, you will see yourself here, right? Or I'm going to hold you by the hand and walk you into this so that you are comfortable, right? Museums do a better and worse job of that. And I'll leave that there. But I thought, what I felt part of our world was, because we serve so many different audiences, from, you know, the whoop-de-whoop art critics to the parents of the kids at SFR and hopefully everybody in between. But what I want is to have people come in for whatever reason and go into one or several of the galleries and say, oh, that's all. Just, oh. And it's why we do so much programming that doesn't necessarily seem perfectly aligned with the gallery experience, because we're always thinking, who is this going to bring into the building? Who's going to be exposed to the art that our galleries are showing, who may never have thought to be exposed to that before? Because the only way we're successful is if our tenants are successful. The only way they can be successful is if people come in to see what they have on the
So this, and I can tie it a little bit to the Sandoz work and work like that. You know, if you bear with me for a second while I walk there. But you know, when the most gratifying thing about the Minnesota Street Project and the spaces and the community that we built is the sense of community and the response that the community throughout the Bay Area has had to spaces and programming that work the way our spaces and programming have turned out to work. And you know, some of the greatest things that have happened, you know, we had the first ever, you can't have first annual, we're going to have the second annual, but last year was the first ever San Francisco Art Book Fair. And it was fabulous. And it was, I mean, the fair itself, the booths, the stuff was great. It was a fantastic fair on the merits of the stuff that was there. But the best part, and you know, again, the questions before were, can you really do that in San Francisco? Because we know you can do it in New York or LA. They're bigger cities. They're used to it. Is there enough interest here in San Francisco? And the night that it opened, Deborah and I were actually on the East Coast. I had to be back here that weekend anyway, so I flew back and I was there the opening night, and I think 4,000 people came, who were practically in tears because everybody who was there saw 3,999 other people they didn't think were going to turn out for something like this. And the sense was, wow, this is a bigger and more engaged and more vibrant community than we realized was here.
And there were a ton of young people.
And a ton of young people. And it was fabulous, right? So that, you know, and that's happened. There have been a few things like that have happened where it's like, this is, you know, because there's a place to gather, the community has come out to gather, and because the community has come out to gather, people have been able to see that they're part of a community. Well, you know, that is now particularly important, right? And we're thinking about how do we capitalize on that now. So let's look at Sandow's work, for example, as an example of the art of social commentary, that makes some social commentary. Why is that kind of art so powerful? Well, I think there are a lot of reasons why that art is powerful, but to me, and I'm not an art historian, I can only speak very personally. One reason why that art is very powerful is that sometimes that art says to me, you're not alone. Right? That an artist can express something, and I can look at that and I can say, wow, okay, there's, I'm not alone either. Other people feel that way, or there's a community that's forming around this, or something. There's a communal response, I'm not alone. And so now, especially, I think the idea that we can help to create and then explore how to build on a community of artists who are not, and people who appreciate art who are not alone, and to have a place for people to not be alone it's particularly important.
We're talking to the folks who, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the 100 Days of Action, which is a arts-based series of events over the first 100 days of the administration to explore ways of response. And we are talking to them about several different ways they might use several different of our spaces, including the front of the building, the atrium, etc. Because, as you said, we have a community space. We feel an obligation to serve the community in that space.
Right. So we'd love to open this up to questions, and
I have something to say.
Got a little surprise for.
So it's been my experience that a lot of people get shy about asking questions. So let's just say if you ask a question, I have a special present for you. And there are only 10, I think. So.
Hey, Katie, I have a question.
I think you own the present.
This is a pretty big question, so but some advice that I need as an art person. Do you have any advice on how to get others in Silicon Valley in particular interested in art?
Okay, I got it. I'm not going to give you the answer you want.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but you still get a present. I have spent the past 20-some years dealing with that question since we moved out here. And I was with the San Jose Museum of Art when we first came out, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the question, which there's a legion of you out there asking exactly the same question, so I'm not picking on you. I think it's the wrong question to ask, quite frankly. I think the question to ask is, what can we do as arts professionals and arts presenters to make up for the fact that there's no art education in the school, so none of these people,
Other than what arts
other
is.
than arts ed, but in terms of just basic public school, there's no art education, so nobody ever told these people that this was important, right? They never had a teacher who said, yes, math and reading and learning the names of the rivers of the world, for some reason, is important, but art, we never talked about, right? So they came into adulthood, especially the people who showed an early aptitude for math and science, without anybody ever saying, this is something you should pay attention to. Now, here they are, they've got disposable income. There's this, I don't know, this mystical tech people in Silicon Valley that everybody wants to get. But nobody's ever told them why. Nobody's ever said, come, let me show you why this is important to me. And maybe then some of you will find it important to you. Or the shorthand version of this is nobody ever did anything by being insulted into doing it. It's our job, and by our, I mean everybody, who's involved in the arts, in arts presentation, in arts making, in arts loving, to take it upon ourselves to be the person who takes somebody by the hand, as I was saying earlier, and walks them into a museum, walks them to a gallery, walks them into a performance of ballet, or theater, or orchestra, or something. It's not that on them, it's on us.
I also want to say that I feel like the media has really skewed the reality around the whole Silicon Valley doesn't collect art thing.
Because it's also not true.
Because, and I actually have to say I've had a firsthand experience with talking to people at Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and the writers have all had, like, I don't fit their, thesis statement, which is Silicon Valley doesn't support the arts. And I did become incredibly, like, resentful of this sort of repeated thing that they don't, because it feels like then it's self-fulfilling. First of all, most of my clients have made their money in some way connected to Silicon Valley, so it's also just not true. I mean, how many doctors do any of us have as clients? Why aren't we like mad at the medical profession? It just seems so
Question.
right? It's like I think we have to have exactly what you're saying, but also I think we have to stop complaining about Silicon Valley. I mean, they're here. Some of those people collect. How can we get more people excited about art, whether they work in Silicon Valley or not?
Or our doctors.
Or our doctors.
So I think that's exactly right. But I have an additional perspective on this, and that is
As
that
being somebody who's
from so yeah. So I think the issue of the way the storyline gets written is that somebody somewhere, I don't know who it is, goes through the list of the Forbes 400 richest people and then the list of the top 200 collectors, and they try to align them. And I think what somebody discovered at the Wall Street Journal or someplace is, oh, there are all these billionaires in Silicon Valley and they're not showing up on this, so obviously Silicon Valley doesn't buy art. And if you look at art as a global commodity that the world's richest people buy and trade, then that's true, actually, that Silicon Valley billionaires do collect art less than Chinese, Beijing billionaires or New York billionaires. That's just a statement of fact. That doesn't mean that people in Silicon Valley don't collect art.
So Katie still has 9 books to give away.
Okay, so
I want to get some students. Lauren?
Hi, Lauren. My question is about taxes and tax law. Kind of just, what are collectors' feelings and gallerists kind of, what are you envisioning the future might be now that there are different conversations on tax law in regards to collecting and having a collection and donating collections or just?
I think we don't really know where things are going to land, but there's a lot of fear. I mean, frankly, I'm more worried about PBS than I am about the tax law. But what I will say is that, meaning support of, I think people who are charitable give first because they're charitable, and second because it, maybe benefits that their tax situation. Artists are asked to give work all the time to nonprofits. They can't even deduct anything other than like the cost of the materials, and yet they give. And galleries, when we give up that work by giving it to a nonprofit to sell, we don't benefit at all, actually. In fact, sometimes it hurts in various ways. Like we no longer have the work. It might sell for below the value that it's priced at in the gallery, et cetera. And yet we still do it because we feel that's something that's important to do. And I would venture to guess that there are many, many collectors who would still give work to museums, whether or not it benefited them financially from it. That said, I think it's a very, very bad idea that they, if they change that law, because there are people probably at higher, that I don't deal with that maybe are motivated by other things.
that is true. So, but I think the key, and this is sort of where I was headed with the other question, which we need to move on. But the key is that you can look at art as a global commodity, or you can look at art as something that has some social relevance. And I think that there are people who view their art as commodities, and they're very strongly influenced by tax laws and other financial considerations. But I think that the most influential collectors throughout history are not those. Right. They're the ones who view the art as being something which is important in terms of its integration with society. And those folks may not make dumb financial moves, but a lot of us do. But I think that they're going to figure out a way to be relevant and to have the art be relevant, irrespective of where the tax laws come.
Can you talk a little bit about your process? You said that you talked about communal living with the galleries. how was that process? Of how you kind of spelled out what to expect, the expectation?
Yeah, I can speak to that because I had a lot of those initial conversations. Our business model, both for the galleries and for the art studios building across the street, is very similar. And it's based on what we heard from the gallerists, starting with this meeting that Katie hosted in her gallery 3 years ago, which was that they have to pay. A standalone gallery has to rent enough space to accommodate the following things. First of all, the largest show they're ever going to want to do. Okay? But then, ADA compliant restrooms, a staff kitchen break room, a place to serve the wine and the openings from, and a packing and shipping room and storage. None of those are revenue producing square feet, right? They're all necessary, but they cost. We never recoup the cost of those square feet, in those square feet. So what we said, what we heard, and then what we reflected back to people was, what if we provide a shared kitchen, a shared packing and shipping, ADA compliant restrooms large enough for the entire building when it is full, and storage nearby, not necessarily within your space at an affordable rate, and the opportunity to rent a larger gallery when you have a show that either you want to spotlight, the work is bigger than the gallery that you are in all the time, whatever. We have that gallery available, which means that you have to rent, your effective rent becomes very low. We charge below market on a per square foot basis, but you're only renting the space that you need to run your business. You don't need the bathroom, you don't need the kitchen, you don't need all that stuff. So that was sort of the proposition that I went out to. We went out to galleries. And in exchange for that, people had to be willing to share services, right? They had to be willing to have their gallery line in the same refrigerator as somebody else's gallery line. They had to, I mean, seriously, it's stuff like that. They had to, you know, agree to share the stuff in the packing and shipping room and return the hammer when they were finished. But they also had to agree to let the other gallerists see who their clients were. And that, surprisingly, to me, not to anybody who's actually ever had a gallery, was the biggest surprise. It was like, we keep our clients secret. We do not want to share them with anybody else, as if art was a zero-sum game. So the galleries who joined us, most of them came on very early, and everybody was in before we were bought into that concept, or were able to be sold on the concept. So I don't know, did that even come close to answering the question?
Yeah.
Good.
All right, we have time for 2 more students. You've been waiting there.
Okay. Hi, I'm Samantha. Just listening to you guys speaking, as mentioned earlier, one of the things you have in common with your artwork selections are that it pertains to social justice. So I was just thinking, in you saying that you're a for-profit, but you do work with nonprofits and philanthropic. Was thinking about listening, though, you said that mainly you do a lot of work with private art, correct? Like with galleries and studios. I would think that that's more private art, would you say? And then with that, in extending that question, do you believe that there is a difference between private and public art and where those lines blur?
I'm not sure I understand.
I think you mean nonprofit and for-profit, right?
No. I mean private art being more so privately owned artists versus like commissioned artworks, commissioned by the city or by and that would publicly funded versus privately.
Yeah, so
Well, I guess I think of it for
Yes, so this actually goes back to something that we commented on early on in describing this, which is the idea that art thrives and requires a broad ecosystem. And, you know, I'm not sure how to envision a world that has vibrant public art, which is incredibly important, but no private collections, or that has, you know, thriving galleries but not thriving museums, or that has a thriving museum presence but not education around that, or that has working artists who are doing well but not organizations that provide them stipends and competitions and other kinds of things that are kind of more public programming. So I think our conception is that every individual component that you can see in an arts ecosystem is required for the survival and health of every one of the other components that you see in the ecosystem. And what we discovered as we started thinking about what we would contribute is that some of those things were kind of naturally happening in San Francisco, and some of those things that had naturally happened before were getting really tough, like, you know, artists not being able to find studio space and stuff like that. So what we did is we said, okay, some of these things, public art programs, museums, those things look like they're happening, right? Let's tackle some of the other pieces, housing nonprofit organizations, private artist studios, galleries, that look like they're not happening and getting harder to do, and we'll do that, and that'll be our contribution to the overall ecosystem.
Seems to me that you've done a job, like a nice job of trying to combine the two together.
Yeah, and let me just point, and then Katie, go ahead. We are expressly not trying to do everything.
Well, and also keep it, the art is at the center of all this, the artist, right?
Right.
And so like none of any of this
None of it matters
exists
without the
or
artists.
makes any sense without the art. So it all comes back to that, right? And
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so, and artists like to eat, so they like to sell their work, and they like public commissions because that it makes
Yes,
their work
and-
out there, and they like to be in museums, and they like all of these things.
And by the way, one reason why we're a for-profit that Deborah sort of alluded to before is because as a for-profit, we get to decide what we want to do, or as a nonprofit, we'd be limited in what we could do. So we said, hey, because we just want to go like fill the holes, then we want maximum flexibility to be able to fill the holes that need filling, and without worrying about is that a public thing or a private thing or a nonprofit thing or a for-profit thing. So that's why we built ourselves as in the most flexible possible way.
Okay, one last student question over here. There was a hand. Someone from my class, Kirsten.
I get already started to touch on this, but you can go into more detail on to what extent being a for-profit institution helps you to be flexible, you know, kind of elucidate like more specifically in what situation.
So to be a nonprofit organization, you have to be able to demonstrate that you are fulfilling, and this is the way it should be, you have to be able to demonstrate to the IRS that you are fulfilling a social purpose, right? And that social purpose needs to be a charitable social purpose, and that social purpose needs to be something which is nonpartisan, which is hard for us to do. You know, and so there are all of these restrictions. So a good example of where being a for-profit helps us do something we couldn't do as a nonprofit is that, you know, we rent space to art galleries who are for-profit businesses. It would be very difficult for us to argue to the IRS that there's a social purpose in providing below-market rent to for-profit businesses, right? And so that's just one example. Another important part is that we built the Minnesota Street Project to be economically self-sustaining. It has revenue that it derives from charging rent and use fees and all kinds of things, our art storage and services business, that provides positive cash flow that helps to underwrite some of the things that we're doing below market that would otherwise have negative cash flow. So the idea is that the whole thing is kind of in balance, so it doesn't depend on any further philanthropy from Deborah. That was very important to us because we needed to make a commitment to the community that whatever we were doing could survive forever, so people could make a long-term commitment to it.
Well, very least survive us.
Could survive us, yeah. But as a nonprofit, whenever you have revenue generating things, then the IRS looks at you and says, well, are you a nonprofit or are you a business, right? And it's really, and there, again, these rules exist for very good reasons, right, to prevent abuse and that kind of thing. So we said, you know what, those are good rules, and we don't want to run afoul of them, but we don't want them to dictate what we can and can't do. We don't want that to undermine our ability to be self-sustaining.
Also, if I might, I've spent most of my life in the nonprofit world. And one of the main differences, besides what Andy just explained, which is incredibly important, is that in the for-profit world, if you decide to do something, you can do it. Same day. In the nonprofit world, if you decide to do something, it takes forever. Nonprofits work on archaeological time. For good reasons. Very good reasons. They need the board buy-in. They need their donors to be supportive. They need the community they're serving to feel that they are still being served. Those are all really good reasons. Had we decided to set up as a nonprofit, we would not have a built-in yet.
So put very succinctly, were we a nonprofit, we would have to agree to be stewards of the public trust.
Right.
We are only stewards of our children's inheritance. We want to.
No, but really, I mean, aside from all of the IRS things, we needed to do something fast.
No, and that was a really important issue at the time because people kept saying at that meeting, like, why can't the city, do something? Why can't the city? And the city has slowly done things.
Right, but they can't
do things fast.
And we needed to do this fast because it was a
It
triage
was urgent.
operation.
We had a quick final comment.
Thank you very much. I think this is fabulous. It's sort of, free-form thinking. In terms of the depravities of Trump that we all are dealing with,
Yes.
I recently heard from my daughter, who's sort of my lifeline to the real world, that on March 15th is going to be the Ides of Trump, and that we are all encouraged on that day to mail a postcard to the White House, because I know probably you tried to call and they closed the lines, or there's all these ways of not communicating. And so what I'm wondering is, for those of us who have some interest in art, and looking at woodcuts and block prints and what we all may have fooled around with, might be interesting for each of us to do something visually, rather than just seeing this guy is blah blah blah, or how do you be in my children's face. And then maybe we could have a show or something of some of these, selected images, because they would fit very nicely on a wall.
Why not?
And then, because I think, going to the Women's March, one of the things, besides just that the tremendous energy that was here in San Francisco, were the fabulous signs, because they weren't all the same. And they were just fabulous. And I think, if we can capitalize on that energy through the arts community, it might be fun.
And there's a
You should
lot.
organize it and do it.
Yeah, I mean,
That's the thing, right? Is like we all do the stuff that we care about, and I think if the takeaway here in part should be, you have an idea, do it. Like seriously,
Don't wait for somebody else.
There are walls right